Well, that passage that we just read together, Matthew 26, verses 45 to 75, opens after Jesus has spent much time in prayer as he prepares himself for the completion of the work that he came to earth to do. Now, 11 of his disciples were with him, and 3 of them were very close to him. The 12th, Judas Iscariot, he had left the group at some point during the Passover celebration. The apostles that were with him, the other 11, they couldn't keep awake despite Jesus' admonition that they should do so. And so Jesus notes this, and when we read, "Then cometh he to his disciples, and saith unto them, Sleep on now, and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners." But the very next thing that is recorded is Jesus saying, "Rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me." And those 2 statements, they've caused writers down through the ages to come up with various views as to how those 2 things fit together. But the most obvious answer, I would say, was the most likely. And that is that there was some passage of time, albeit perhaps quite short, between those 2 verses. So what do we have? Jesus then, he returns from his struggles in prayer, now, of course, in a state of peace, in submission to his Father's will. In his distress, he had sought for these disciples to stay awake with him, but now, although the reality of what is shortly going to happen hasn't gone away, we find Jesus now caring for these disciples who couldn't stay awake, and he's concerned about them while they sleep. "Take your rest," he says, "for trouble is at hand." Now, we've seen that he's told them a number of times that he will be betrayed. He's even told them that one of them, one of the 12, will be the betrayer. Now, the hour of that event will shortly be upon them. And sure enough, before too long, Jesus, he's rousing his disciples, telling them that only is the hour at hand, but he, the betrayer, is at hand. Now remember, this was at night time, and so we can probably in our mind's eye see this group of people, this host of lights approaching as the gang came near, and various of them, of course, holding aloft their lamps. And there at the head was Judas, the leader then of this motley crew. And they've got swords and clubs with them. This was like a little army coming out to arrest Jesus. An army that the priests, etc., had supplied Judas with. And to make sure that this little army got the right man, Judas had told them that he would identify Jesus by kissing him. He probably told them that a kiss wouldn't arouse any suspicion. After all, he's my friend. And you would, certainly in those days, you would welcome friends with a kiss. But of course, Jesus wasn't really welcome. The chief priests and elders wanted rid of him. And Judas has become the hypocrite for them. So he does indeed greet Jesus and kisses him. But you notice that Jesus still refers to him as friend. And when Jesus says, "Wherefore art thou come?" well, that would be like us today saying, "What have you come for?" Now Luke gives us a more full account. He has Jesus saying, "Betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss?" You see, the point is that Jesus, we've already noted on previous occasions, Jesus knew what Judas was up to, and he was ensuring now that Judas really felt his guilt. And the thing is that if Judas should so shamelessly betray the Son of God like this, we should not wonder if hypocrites rise up within the church and sort of betray Christ from within. Now, it's always distressing when that happens, but it should not come as a surprise. If Judas can do it, then that could happen to almost anyone. Well, then the kiss having been given, the band of men, they lay hold of Jesus, and Jesus addresses them. He doesn't just address them, though, he upbraids them. He upbraids them because they're cowards and they're so changeable. In verse 55 we read, "In that same hour said Jesus to the multitudes, Are ye come out as against a thief with swords and staves for to take me? I sat daily with you teaching in the temple, and ye laid no hold on me." In other words, what he was saying is, what has changed? As I taught, teaching you quite publicly in the open, there in the temple, neither you nor anyone else came and took hold of me. You didn't even try to do so. But now, because it's dark, you come not only with weapons to arrest a crook, but you come against one man with this multitude. Now, of course, we don't read there that he actually called them cowards, but you can sense it in those words. Yeah? It wouldn't have been any more difficult for them to arrest him in the daytime in the temple, because he was never armed. He was never armed, was he? They could have come and taken him. So had his teaching suddenly changed so dramatically? Had he turned into some seditious person, a genuine threat to the people? Well, of course he hadn't. But it was appropriate that these ones, they should do their deed in the darkness of the night. Think of what the Apostle Paul recorded about when Jesus appeared to him on the Damascus Road. He says that Jesus told him, among other things, that he was to open their eyes and to turn them from darkness to light, and from the power of Satan unto God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins. You could read about that in Acts 26, that was verse 18. But you might also think of when he wrote to the Thessalonians. He wrote, "Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of the darkness." That was 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 5. Wicked deeds are done in the darkness, and they are deeds that are inspired by Satan. And this is what Jesus lays at the door of these men, this little army with their clubs and staves. But really we should ask ourselves, are we sort of tender-hearted toward Jesus when those around us can hear our words, but come the cloak of darkness or any other means of being in secret, do we despise him? Would we turn on him as if he were nothing special? Are we secretly in that army brandishing swords and clubs? Well, I trust that such thoughts only invoke revulsion in us. But of course, only you know, and you and the Lord, of course. But then there is another army mentioned in this passage. And again, they're not spoken of as an army, but Jesus says, "Thinkest thou that I cannot now pray to my Father, and he shall presently give me more than 12 legions of angels?" Now, a legion consists of about 5,000 or 6,000 men. So Jesus is saying that he could easily call on an army of angels to come to his aid. So he could do that, but he's not going to. Now, this comment of his, that he could call on such a large army, it's been brought about by the actions taken by Peter Now, Matthew just makes mention that it was one of them which were with Jesus. It's John that spills the beans and tells us it was Peter. Anyway, we're told that Peter stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck a servant of the high priest's and smote off his ear. And it's John that not only tells us that it was Peter that had done it, but he gives us the servant's name. It was Malchus. And of course the inference there is that his readers could go off and find Malchus to ask him if this really happened. But here, Jesus he quickly stops all this getting out of hand. He quickly tells Peter to put his sword away, because all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Now, I think you know that there is a general prohibition against taking personal vengeance in the Bible, but this does seem to go beyond even that. After all, this could be seen to be a case of self-defence. The gang didn't appear to have any legitimate authority to come with such a threatening force. But it's probable that Jesus, as always, was thinking of others, on this occasion thinking of Peter. Because, if things had got out of hand, Peter's life would have been at risk. And as Jesus told Peter, if he needed that kind of protection, there was this host of angels, each one of them much more powerful than Peter, that could have come to his aid. So, as Jesus also said to Peter, and as Matthew additionally records, all this was done that the scriptures of the prophets might be fulfilled. As we've noted before, Jesus came not to do his own will, but the will of his Father who sent him, says that in John 5 verse 30. Came to fulfill God's purposes, and he saw that as much more important than his own peace and comfort. And so once again I ask, are we like that, do you think? Or are we too tied to the niceties of this world? Again, think of what is recorded of Jesus in Hebrews 12 and verse 2. It says about him, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. And that's the attitude that should be in us. Now, I've said that, and I appreciate that it's not always an easy thing. Indeed, I would say that it's an impossible thing, unless you are convinced that Christianity is true. And of course, you should only believe something if you are convinced it is true. If you're not convinced that Christianity is true, you can't really believe it. And if you don't really believe it, then what's your faith? It's just a charade. And if you're in that position, you're in a very dangerous position. I say, listen to what the Bible actually says. See how it speaks to you. See how you're encouraged to think these things through. I say, don't miss out on the glorious work of Jesus just because you have a faulty view of the Bible. Anyway, returning to our passage, as well as the two armies, the army with the clubs and staves and swords, and the army, the host of angels, as well as that, we see two silent men. Now, I am actually stretching the definitions a bit there, but we do, first of all, see Jesus silent before his accusers. Having prevented a dangerous brawl breaking out, Jesus is then taken away by the mob, and they take him to the palace of Caiaphas. And that itself is an interesting contrast, isn't it? You've got Jesus, the Son of God, in a garden, and you've got Caiaphas, the high priest, in a palace. That picture alone should show us just how badly things had gone wrong in Israel. But in the palace then, there appears to be another hastily called assembly of the Sanhedrin. You may remember that not many days previously, they had met together to discuss how they might kill Jesus. We considered that when looking at the beginning of this very chapter. So here they are again with Jesus in their clutches. They've already decided they're going to kill him. So now they have to find a reason for doing so. Now, if they had had a just cause, they would have been able to take him at any time, as we said, and hand him over to the Romans. But they didn't have a just cause. They didn't even have a just cause under their own laws. And so they have to seek out these false witnesses. And they persist in this. They don't give up. You're told at first that such false witnesses could not be found. But that didn't stop them in their wicked tracks. They were going to get their way no matter what. They were blinded in their rage. And that's another thing we would do well to take note of. When we get angry, there is a very real danger of anger taking over and all reason flying out of the window. We would indeed be foolish to think that such things cannot happen to us. Well, in the end, they get two men, because for some reason they were going to uphold the law where one man's not enough, so they seek out two. The hypocrisy of them just manifold. Anyway, they get their two men, and these two, they don't totally make anything up, but they do recall an incident from early on in Jesus' ministry, and they put a false twist on it. Mark tells us that even then, those two men could not align their stories. But this event then was in the first year of Jesus' public ministry. He'd gone up to Jerusalem, and in the temple he drove out the money changers, etc., something that he'd done again relatively recently. But on that first occasion, he was asked what sign he could show to show that he had authority to do those things. He replied, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." You'll find that in John 2 and verse 19. So note that he did not say that he would destroy the temple. He said, and the Greek is quite clear on this, he said, "You will destroy this temple." And as John went on to say, but he spake of the temple of his body. Even if they hadn't caught on that Jesus was not speaking about the temple that Herod was currently adorning, the truth was that he had not said anything about himself destroying the temple. But these witnesses, they turn it around and claim that is what he said. And Jesus has no time for these wicked and false accusations. As Isaiah had prophesied all those hundreds of years earlier, Jesus, as a sheep before her shearers is dumb, so he openeth not his mouth. That was Isaiah 53 and verse 7. It's only when the high priest asks him about something true that Jesus answers. In verse 63 we read, "And the high priest answered and said unto him, I adjure thee by the living God, that thou tell us whether thou be Christ, the Son of God." To adjure someone was to basically put them under oath. But it's pretty evident from things that had happened earlier that week, and even on that very day, that Caiaphas had no interest in examining the evidence in any kind of a judicious manner. He would be satisfied with nothing less than the death of Jesus. But what we do see is that it was commonly accepted that the Christ, the Messiah, would be the Son of God. "Tell us whether thou be the Christ, the Son of God," Caiaphas had asked. And Jesus is plain and quite open in his reply. Jesus saith unto him, "Thou hast said, nevertheless I say unto you, hereafter shall ye see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of the power and coming in the clouds of heaven." Those words, "thou hast said," carry a very positive affirmation. And Jesus is saying, yes, I am exactly who you say I am, or I claim to be. And he emphasises this by quoting the prophet Daniel. He's saying that although you look on me in contempt now, another day is coming when I shall appear in great glory. He wanted them to be in no doubt that he was the one whom Daniel had prophesied, the one whose kingdom was an everlasting kingdom, and whom people of all nations would serve. We have a saying, don't we, that appearances can be deceptive. And that so evidently applied to Christ when he walked this earth. And yet all the works that he did, they certainly pointed to his power and glory, something which the religious assembly didn't care to examine while Jesus was under oath. And of course that is the problem with so many people. They have preconceived ideas about Christianity and even about Jesus himself. They have such preconceived ideas that they will not bother to examine matters impartially. And yet once more I ask, are you like that? I encourage you to pick up a Bible and to read what it actually says. Now then, because this council were not actually interested in examining the facts, they could not bear to hear what Jesus was saying. Indeed, they go so far as to say, what further need have we of witnesses? They accuse him of blasphemy, which would have been correct had he not been who he said he was. But these men, they are not going to let something as simple as the truth get in the way of a good execution. And so, having declared him guilty in their eyes, they think this gives them the right to taunt Jesus. You see all the buffeting and the smiting, etc. And we should make no mistake about this. Godlessness always tends towards violence. Today's so-called liberal may profess such noble qualities as love and justice, but if you are not in wholehearted agreement with everything they say, you will soon suffer a torrent of abuse. And of course, verbal abuse very easily transfers to physical violence. Well, while all this was going on in the palace of Caiaphas, there was another silent man. Now, his was silence of a different sort. Peter was silent about his association with Jesus. He refuses to own his Lord, whom just a few hours earlier he was saying he would never deny. His Lord, whom he said he would die before disowning. And he starts out quite well, having run away with all the others while they were in Gethsemane. He seems to have a change of heart and follows after to the palace of Caiaphas. So presumably he's there in the courtyard. We discover elsewhere that John is with him. But the focus here is on Peter and a young girl, possibly a servant, because John tells us she kept the door. She says to him, "Thou also wast with Jesus of Galilee." Now, that wasn't a particularly big deal. She was probably just making a passing observation. So Peter, he's facing this girl, while Jesus is facing and standing up to the assembled council. But Peter is terrified of the words of this girl and immediately denies what she says. If nothing else, this should show us just how weak we are if we are not upheld by God. John Calvin notes, our strength is so far from being sufficient to resist powerful attacks that it will give way when there is the mere shadow of a battle. And that is probably where our weakness lies when it comes to personal evangelism. We may not as deliberately deny Jesus in the way that Peter did, I'm not suggesting that, but when we are rebuffed with strong words, then we tend to prefer to keep our silence. But is that really any different to what Peter was doing? Well, the voice of the girl probably carried somewhat, or she may simply have shared her thoughts with the others. And so another girl, and not just to Peter this time, but to all who were round about, she says, this fellow was also with Jesus of Nazareth. And the way that John records this, it would appear that those that were warming themselves around the fire, they voiced their agreement with the girl. Now, let's not forget, Peter's not on trial here, but he insists on denying their statements with an oath. So he goes from bad to worse. And we see that yet again when it comes to his third denial. But what we should learn is just how easy it is that once we stumble, how easy it is to then fall. Being so easy, we ought always to be in prayer that God would be the one to uphold us. And that is why Jesus taught us in what we call the Lord's Prayer. He taught us to pray, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So it was then that those warming themselves, having heard Peter speaking, they confirmed their belief that he was with Jesus because he was patently Galilean. And as I said, his denial gets even more vehement, cursing and swearing. Now, whether this means that his language was more colourful than it ought to have been, or whether he was swearing an oath and at the same time invoking a curse against himself, either way, he was putting himself in grave danger. And that is something yet further for us to keep in mind. Denying Jesus, however we do it, is very dangerous to us. Now, if we are true believers, we can be thankful for the mercy of God, the one who brings us through such times and restores us. But we cannot take such things for granted. We can't think, that's God's job to do that. We can't think like that. We cannot be blasé about such things. Well, Peter, having made his third denial, then of course he hears the cock crow. John also tells us that it was at this time that Jesus looks at Peter, presumably then as Jesus is being led away to Pilate. Anyway, Peter, he recalls that Jesus had told him that this would happen, and as it says, he wept bitterly. Our sin should never sit easily on us. We should not allow ourselves to pass through life unchallenged by our failings. If we would know the forgiveness of sin, we should know the sorrow for it too. All in all, we should not think that we can manage. It is much better that we trust ourselves to him who underwent all for us. And why wouldn't we? He has demonstrably shown his care and affection toward others. If we come to Jesus, we will be saved. We will be saved, safe and secure for all eternity. So do, if you haven't already, come now. Come to Jesus while you can.